Let me share something with you now that I think my good friend Tom Hortman wrote. I'm pretty sure Hortman wrote it. Under the heading, How a Corrupt Supreme Court Turned Debate into Death. Charles Kirk, well, Tom starts with a quote from Charles Kirk. Quote, I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It's rational. Unquote. Charlie Kirk is dead. So is former Democratic Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark. Two clearly political assassinations in the past 4 months. And a new study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's journal Pediatrics suggests that most of the deaths from the more than 250 mass shootings in America so far this year could also be classified as resulting from politics. How did we get here? And what do we do? In 2008, in the NRA's pocket, Republican Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia did much the same thing that Sam Alito would later do with his Dobbs anti-abortion ruling. Scalia reached back hundreds of years to look for a definition at the time the Second Amendment was written for how people then viewed the phrase bear arms. And then Scalia twisted it beyond recognition. The result was the Heller decision, as I have laid out, in which unleashed a new wave of guns in an unsuspecting America. It was followed 2 years later by McDonald v. Chicago, another NRA-purchased all-Republican decision striking down Chicago's gun control laws and forcing cities in blue states to accept more weapons, whether their people, through their elected officials, wanted that tsunami of guns in their communities or not. As Justice John Paul Stevens wrote in his dissent in McDonald, quote, although the court's decision in this case might be seen as a mere adjunct to his decision in Heller, the consequences could prove far more destructive, quite literally, to our nation's communities and to our constitutional structure, end quote. As we saw yesterday with the right's new martyr, and have been seeing in the daily toll of gun deaths that America, alone among all other nations in the world, suffers from, Justice Stevens was prescient. We are literally the only country in the world that is experiencing this magnitude of gun crisis. Half of the guns in civilian hands in the entire world are here in the United States. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that the leading cause of childhood death in the U.S. is bullets, and that political assassinations have become routine. The study in the journal Pediatrics looked at child gun deaths in America before and after the 2010 McDonald decision. What they found is shocking. That decision caused two major changes in gun laws across America. The first was that nearly every red state loosened their gun laws, sometimes in the extreme, even allowing open carry of semi-automatic weapons of war without any permit or regulation. Most blue states, on the other hand, looked for and found ways around the decision to actually tighten their gun control laws. The result was astonishing. Between 2011 and 2023, the study period, red states that had loosened their gun laws saw 7,453 more children killed by firearms than the pre-McDonald statistical trends would have predicted had the Republicans on the court not further loosened gun laws. In blue states that maintained or strengthened their gun laws, child gun deaths remained the same as before McDonald and Heller. And to quote the study, quote, 4 states, California, Maryland, New York, and Rhode Island, had decreased pediatric firearm mortality after McDonald versus Chicago, all of which were in the strict firearm law group, end quote. Melissa Hortman was a strong advocate of gun control laws. Charles Kirk opposed them. Both are dead by gunfire, along with hundreds of children and adults so far this year. When Ms. Hortman was murdered by a politically inspired right-wing thug, some conservatives on X and other platforms celebrated. Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee, for example, tweeted, quote, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way," along with a picture of the shooter. An hour later, again showing the suspect's picture, Senator Lee wrote, "Nightmare on Wall Street," apparently trying to humorously reference Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and his advocacy for gun control. Yesterday, in the wake of Kirk's murder, some liberals were posting the equivalent of good riddance to social media platforms, some making Lee's obscene posts seem tame. Both are reprehensible. Instead, let's take this moment to reflect on how the NRA's work over the past decades, often funded and supported by Putin's Russia, killed both of them and tens of thousands of children and adults over the years. This week, NPR reported that school shootings have spawned a $4 billion industry, selling everything from bulletproof backpacks to panic buttons, bullet-resistant whiteboards, facial recognition technology, training simulators, body armor, guns, and tasers. They note this, quote, Tom McDermott, with the metal detector manufacturer CEIA USA, says schools used to be a small fraction of their U.S. business. Now they're the majority. McDermott says, quote, "It's not right. We need to solve this problem. It's good for business, but we don't need to be selling to schools," end quote. Sarah McNeely, a sales manager with SAM Medical, is selling trauma kits, which include tourniquets, clotting agents, and chest seals. She says their customers are traditionally EMTs, fire departments, and military medics, but increasingly school districts. It's insane that America's answer to 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court and the NRA flooding our country with deadly weapons is to create a multi-billion-dollar industry to stop bullets or ameliorate their damage in our public schools. The vast majority of Americans want rational gun control laws instead of this Wild West insanity. Every other developed country in the world has them. Not a single one forces their children through the trauma of active shooter drills or subjects them to metal detectors and requires them to occasionally come face to face with murderous psychopaths armed to the teeth. It's way past time for our politicians to wake the hell up, and hopefully the assassination of a far-right gun rights icon will cause at least a few Republicans to break with their party's fealty to the weapons industry and join the Democrats to make America safe again. Tom Hortman, writing at his website. Just prior to the killing of Charles Kirk yesterday, a student opened fire at his Colorado high school, wounding 2 classmates and then turning the gun on himself. He's now dead, according to the local sheriff's office. This particular act of school violence occurred at the Evergreen High School, and according to Associated Press, it happened about 12:25 local time in the afternoon. 3 students were taken to the hospital in critical condition following the gunfire, including the suspect shooter. The sheriff's office confirmed the suspect had died in a post on social media yesterday evening. His identity has not been publicly released yet. One of the wounded students with non-life-threatening injuries was released yesterday evening. The second wounded student remains in critical condition, according to a hospital spokesperson today. And in a statement, the Colorado governor, Jared Polis, said he was, quote, devastated, end quote, by the shooting. He went on to say, quote, "My heart goes out to the victims and their families as they grapple with this senseless act of violence." end quote. A spokesperson for the county sheriff there said at a news conference after the shooting, quote, "This is the scariest thing you'd ever think could ever happen," end quote. The spokeswoman said authorities were seeking a warrant for the student's home and locker, the dead student, the one who the police identified as the killer. The sheriff's office said the suspect had been armed with a revolver. FBI director, the werewolf-looking freak Kash Patel, who has as much business heading the FBI as I do, he said the FBI was, quote, aware of the tragic situation unfolding near Denver. Officials are providing full support of local authorities to ensure everyone's safety, end quote. So as Tom Hortman wrote, and I shared with you last segment, the murder continues, the gun industry continues, the NRA or its advocates continue, although there are different gun advocate companies now, or advocates, gun advocate organizations. Come on, Mike. My brain is still scrambled from all this shit. It really is. And one of the biggest advocates of everybody being armed and so on and so forth, Charles Kirk, is now a corpse. And, of course, his words will echo, I think, for a long time, what he said about, a few gun deaths every year is just necessary for the preservation of a Second Amendment, and that those gun deaths are worth it. They're worth it. Well, Charles, you miserable bastard, you purveyor of hate and distrust and lies and deception, especially with young people, you monster, you have fulfilled your own statement. In case you hadn't noticed, Charles, you're fucking dead. And as far as the rhetoric about that's coming from the right wing, from the neo-fascists in this country, led by the toilet rat himself. Donald Trump was the one who, on January 6th, stood in front of the White House and advocated for extreme violence, attack the Capitol, go after, hang Mike Pence, murder the Speaker of the House, get Nancy Pelosi, and if you can't get her, send a thug out to get her husband. I mean, Trump has been the biggest purveyor of violence this country in the presidency has ever seen. During his first campaign, when the police put their hand on a suspect's head to put him into the police car, you don't have to do that. Bang their fucking head against the police car. And when people would protest at his rallies, beat him up, get him the fuck out of here. And an open boat with a few people off the coast of Venezuela. Kill them. Don't interdict. Don't ask questions. Kill them. The biggest advocate for violence, as long as it's against the people that the toilet rat designates as victims, has been him. And it's not going to stop. It's only going to increase. This filthy fucking Donald Trump is dividing this country in a way that I don't know if we're ever going to be able to consider ourselves to be the United States of America again. I'm beginning to have serious doubts, very serious doubts. And it's all thanks to this son of a bitch and people like him. These red hat wearing fucking knuckle dragging morons. Yeah, Donald. Yeah, goddamn right. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West, on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.